the refresh, and you can actually see that it'll refresh. So I'll go to country next. So first, there's two levels in the country option, or country branch. Basically, first, once again, I have a class variable that's an array that stores all of my country summary objects. And the first thing that you do for the user is you print all of the country names with their country codes in order so that the user can, because if they want to see if they've entered country here, they want to understand, or they want to get the information about a specific country, and so they obviously would probably already have a country in mind, but in case they just wanted to randomly choose something, then print out the full list, and then prompt the user for the country name or two-letter code. So the country, I create here an array called country, and kick into this loop here while the country size is 0, because you get the user's input here on line 57, and if the user input is, which I'm calling user country size, if that's 2 characters, then it's a country code. There are no countries that only have 2 characters. That is an assumption that I've made. I did my research so far. If in the future there's a country that is born or that is created and recognized as a sovereign state, then this would have to be updated. But for now, this works. So the user country size is 2, then use the method that I built, find by code, for the country, and give that as or assign that to the country variable, populate the array, I guess, with the results. You'll see, but the results for both of these find by methods in the country summary return arrays. So basically update the country. If the results from the 2-letter code or from the entering the name is 0, that basically just means whatever method, either find by code or find by name, was used, there were no results that were found. So the array is still 0. So then I would put, like if I said blah blah, which is not a country, I can't find a country name with that code, and then basically it would prompt the user again for entering the information, and then kicks back up to here. So now we're back at line 57 in the loop. And now if I say US, then what's going to happen is, before I enter this, what's going to happen is it's going to search by code. It's going to find the US country. There's only one that has, everything is unique in the country code and the country name, but just in case I'm right here, if the country size is not 0, I looped through the country array just in case there were more than one. So far, there are no duplicates for the country codes or country names. So thankfully, if I press US, it'll just return the US's statistic, which is, a lot. But anyway, and then of course, once that, the country size would be greater than 0 because there would be 1 object, we'd exit the loop and then be prompted to continue browsing. If I say yes, then I'll go back. And I think I've showed you everything there. So now let me show you some factoids that I was having fun with. I just built, 4 methods in the country summary cases to show the countries that have the most cases, the least cases, the most new cases, for if a user wanted to understand who is sort of increasing the most and who's the most at risk, which FYI, it's us, the United States, or the most recovered cases. So once the user, if you put in one of these object or one of these commands, then the continue browsing prompt happens, and the user can go back and say if they want to see more. So let's try another factoid. Most recovered, which is China. 78,000 out of 82,000 total cases have been recovered, which is awesome. So yeah, these factoids I'll explain more once we go through the country summary class. But for now, let's see if the data has been refreshed. I don't know if it has. Okay, it hasn't been refreshed yet, but maybe we can go back and go through that later. So the data loader, let's walk through that first. When I call, as a reminder, when the program begins, the first thing that happens is it greet the user, and then it call the load data method, which basically creates the new data loader. And on instantiation, I assign this attribute data to the result of this call method. So all of this information here I found on Postman and provided the documentation up here in the link. So I used this and finagled it a little bit to my own to get what I needed, but basically you create a HTTPS object using the URL, and then a new net HTTP. And once you have that and turn on the SSL flag, then, excuse me, you basically use, well, and then you create a HTTP get object. You use that to get the response by using the request method from that net or the HTTP class. You use that instant method request using the get object that you've done, and then this read body method is just something that I found that converts this. It's a HTTP OK object. This if you took out this read body, this would be a HTTP OK object right here, but this read body method converts it to a string, which is much more user friendly, obviously, so that we can present stuff to the user. So that's essentially what happens. So at the end of instantiation, you actually have this data attribute for your data loader, which is just a giant string that has all the information. I'll skip ahead. So after the data is loaded, once again, to be user friendly, I put out this data loaded, making summaries now, blah, 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 and call the make summaries method which is an instance method of the data loader class. And this is where the magic happens of actually loading all of the data into objects. So I won't go through everything because it's kind of trivial, but it's honestly mostly just cleaning up the string. There were these brackets and curly braces that were sort of breaking apart different sections. So I split into that, and then that was a giant array. And I took out all of the places that, there were empty strings or new line characters or just commas that resulted from that split. And then basically from there had only mostly some like / quotation marks and random things to delete. So basically this string is a huge string that needed to take care of. And the first, I made it into an array, the first object, or sorry, the first element and the last element were the global name and the global date, respectively. So that's what this code is doing here, is just basically taking the first and last elements of the array and sort of reformatting them a little bit better. And then this one is even I got it into this date, as you can see down here. It's a little bit more user friendly than what was spit out from the API, so that's just allowing for a little bit better readability. And now down here, the next element in the array was basically what would happen is from this point on, once you've removed the first and last element, every element was primarily a string that had all of this information in it, including the name and the date of the last update. But for the global, of course, the name and the date we'd already manually pulled out. So I built this helper method called parser, which basically takes in the string and formats it correctly because all the formatting was consistent, and takes all of that information and returns a hash that can be used to actually create my summary objects, because I use metaprogramming to create that. So for the global hash, obviously it's just missing the name and the date, but since we've already manually done that, after this global hash is updated here on line 60, 60 and 60, 63 and 64, just manually put in the name and date keys with the values that we've already stripped away from the array. So then I instantiate my new summary object, which once again, this is just going to be the global information. And that's the only time that in my code that I create a new summary object, which is why I know that it will always be just one object long in that array. But once again, usually I use the print all or something methods just for scalability purposes. Then next is there's one more little thing to clean up, which is just there's a next entry was sort of this countries, it said countries to let you know that the countries are coming next. So I broke that apart, formatted it, and then made sure that it says countries. If it didn't, then I sort of raised an error, I guess, on my own that said, the API data format has changed. It's no longer compatible with the code. This would basically not load any of the countries at this point if this happened, and would just put out an error to the user that said, listen, we've got an issue because the data format has changed for the API. So at this point, the code wouldn't make sense. So that's just something good for me to know, that if I run this and I see this code, then I need to look back into the response from the API call and see what has changed. Hopefully it doesn't change. It's been consistent over the last 3 or 4 days as I've worked on it. So I'm hoping that it stays consistent. So anyway, if this is, the data format hasn't changed, then at this point, the rest of that array that I broke up is just an array of strings, and each string has all of the information about the country that I want to load. So then for each country info, I basically just take out these quotation marks, and then use my parser method to come up with a hash, and then use that hash to instantiate a new country summary object. And that's how all of the data is created. A quick look at the parser method. Basically,